that sense. I don't know.
Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem shalom.
It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back.
I didn't hear the whole conversation. I can imagine where it comes from and where it's going to. There are no rules for non-Jews. That's point number one. If you're looking for something written, so to speak, for non-Jews on this regard, forget it. You're not going to find it. And I can understand the reason very simple, because those rules, I don't know, you have to understand where the quote unquote holiday comes from destruction of the temple, from suffering from those non-Jews. I'm not saying you, I'm saying 2,000 years ago, okay? That's what I'm talking about. So there was no reason, and it didn't make any sense at all at that time to say, okay, so we'll make the non-Jews also mourn this. What do you mean mourn this? You destroy this. You're happy about this. So it doesn't make any sense at that time to impose rules on non-Jews that they should actually mourn the destruction of the temple and be sad and fast and etc. etc. In the moment that our sages actually sent us or gave us the ruling of being sad and mourning, etc., it didn't make any sense at all to think about non-Jews. Not at all. So that's why we don't find any writings regarding this for non-Jews. Having said that, if a person, of course, times changed. Of course, the non-Jews of today are not the non-Jews of those days. And the truth is, we're going to learn a little bit about this also. So if a person wants to, I'll say, quote unquote, mourn the destruction of the temple, it's a proper thing to do. Certainly, why not? Are you obligated to? No, definitely not. Are you obligated to fast? No, certainly not. The truth is that there are many, many ideas regarding fasting in Judaism itself, and today we only fast those fasts that are communal fasts. I'm not going to go into the details right now. So I would not add fasting days to regular everyday life. Not at all. Not at all. You're going to tell me, well, wait a second, the Jews do fast in this day. Okay, do you feel like fasting? You can do it. It's not forbidden for you to do it. If you choose some other day and you say, no, because the Jews fast in Tisha B'Av, so I will fast in the middle of this day. No, no. What are you doing? You're making up a new religion. Nobody fasts the day you chose to fast. Do you choose to fast the same day Jews fast? Okay. I'll say this a little bit ironic. Be happy. You want to fast? Okay. Enjoy. You feel you're too fat? Okay. Go fast. It's going to help you, whatever. You're not obligated. Do you want to do it? You can do it. Yes, you can do it. You're not obligated to do it. And if you do it, the proper thing would be to follow the ideas and the rulings, so to speak, of that fasting day. That would mean fast starts at night and it's up to the next night. The truth is, right now in Argentina it's winter, so for us it's a kind of short fast. But for Europe, Eretz Israel, it's a long fast. In the United States also, it's a long fast. The day is a really long day. So it's a long fast. Starts the previous night and ends the next night. So sometimes, depending on where you are in the earth, would be more than 24 hours fasting. So it's a long fast, really. And again, it should be done the way Jews fast, if you choose to do it. You don't wash your mouth, you don't eat, you don't drink. Okay, whatever, the rulings of the fasting, that has to be learned. I heard about buying houses and so on. Are you forbidden to buy a house in this particular time of the year? The answer is no, you're not. You're not forbidden. Do Jews buy houses and new things and do happy things in these particular 3 weeks? The answer is no, we don't. We don't. And if you get an incredible opportunity that you would really lose it if you don't take it right now, okay, so ask a rabbi and analyze it with a rabbi. For non-Jews, I would say definitely go buy the house. Definitely. Why should you get into trouble without any necessity? Not at all. Go buy the house and it's going to be fine. Definitely. It's going to be okay.
I
And I'll
prefer
give
to
you,
I prefer to wait 1 week.
okay,
I'm
that's
just going
fine.
to, but
I'm not saying it's
that's my no,
forbidden.
it's my personal choice in
I'm not
that
saying that's
case.
forbidden. One more idea which kind of would prove this point of buying the house, and there's no problem about it. The Mishnah says, "Mishenichnas Av mema'atim besimcha." From the moment that the month of Av starts, we reduce in happy things. That means no buildings, no buyings, no big buyings. I mean, no important things and so on. And one of the rulings, which I want to bring as a kind of proof to what I'm saying, is if you have a court case against a non-Jew, that's how it's written. If you have a court case against a non-Jew in these particular weeks, try to push it off. Like, okay, we'll do it in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks, next month, whatever. Try to push it off. Why? Because the mazal, the so to speak, good luck of the Jews, it's really going down in this particular time. And the mazal, the so to speak luck, this is not written, but this is the obvious consequence of this phrase of the lack of non-Jews of Jews. I'm sorry, is going down. The lack of non-Jews is going up. Okay. Having said that, that's what it's basically written. Let's think about it a little bit. Very simple, even though it doesn't really sound so nice, but it's very simple thinking. Okay, we're talking about the non-Jews of those days, 2,000 years ago. Bad people, idolaters, pagans, destroyed the temple, killed so many people. Terrible people, erased it from the face of the earth. Erase them. Get rid of them. Okay, that's fine. Today, we don't find the same people. There's no such a thing today. All right, but they're still non-Jews. What does that mean? That the source, spiritual source, where those people 2,000 years ago came from, is the same spiritual source that non-Jews come from today. But today there's more awareness, today there's more knowledge, there's more going closer to Torah, and so on. And that's fine. But the mazal is the same. That didn't change. So the mazal of Jews is going down. The mazal of non-Jews is going up. So why not buy a house? It's okay. No problem. But whatever, I understand, really, I understand that some of these subjects are dependent of how a person feels. Not so dependent on what's written, because there's nothing written about it. So if you feel like not buying, don't buy. Feel like buying, buy. It's not a problem. Not a problem at all. All right. Michael. All right, should we start?
We can start. Yes, we
All
can.
right, I'll start recording just a second. Okay, today we will learn a very small piece, like 3 phrases, just that, of Talmud. I'll give a very brief introduction on what Talmud is. And the objective of today is to understand these small phrases that we're going to learn from the Talmud, but to use this as a, so to speak, a springboard to understand other phrases. We could spend hours and hours looking at these weird phrases that we're going to learn in a few minutes. And the truth is, all of them have an explanation. All of them. And I'm not talking about an explanation that we say, no, because really it meant this and that, but it's not really a good explanation. No, 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 no. Each single phrase that looks weird in the Talmud, there's a reason for that. There's something behind it. It's not that the Talmud sages, like 1800 years ago, were so crazy that wrote whatever they thought about. No, 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 no. They have their meaning. Today, we're going to learn specifically about one idea that the Talmud brings about the perspective of the Jews on non-Jews. That's what we're going to learn about. And again, this can be used to explain not just this particular subject that we're going to learn, the phrase that we're going to learn, but to other phrases. It can be applied to other places in the Talmud. So first of all, as a very brief, I don't want to spend too much time on this, very brief introduction to the Talmud. What's the Talmud? The word Talmud itself means learning, limud, learning. And it's one of the main books, so to speak, which is a huge book. It's not just one book. It's a huge book that brings the law of the Jewish people. And it's written in a very, very special way, very, very particular way. Most of it is Aramaic, not Hebrew. That's the language that they used to talk about when it was written. So you can learn, you can read over here. I'm not going to read the whole things that I wrote over here. The Talmud itself it's built on two ideas, Mishnah and Gemara. Mishnah means also learning, teaching. Gemara also means tradition, learning, teaching. And basically, the Mishnah is the first book of oral Torah. Again, I'm not saying all the details because that's not the objective of this class. But oral Torah means one of the ways of passing down Torah through generations was in a written way, text, literally, handwritten and so on, because there was no printing and so on. Okay, and the other way was oral tradition, that the oral tradition goes together with the written tradition. One without the other cannot exist. The oral tradition without the written tradition doesn't have any source. Where you got this from? And the written tradition without the oral tradition, it's impossible to understand. Literally impossible to understand what the Torah is talking about if you don't have the oral tradition to it. And this is something that doesn't happen only to Judaism and doesn't even happen only to religion. It's a common and regular way of learning. There's a very small story. I could make it long. I don't want to do it. A story with Hillel HaZaken. We're talking about around year 100 or 200 before the Common Era, where a person that wanted to convert went to Hillel and asked him to teach him the Torah. So Hillel said, okay, I can teach you the Torah, etc. But the guy said, I don't believe in the oral Torah. Just believe in the written Torah. Okay, no problem, said Hillel. I'll teach you Torah anyway. So first day, Hillel showed him a letter Aleph, one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the first letter. And the guy learned, okay, this is the Aleph, yes, this is the shape of the Aleph and so on, very nice. Okay, come back tomorrow, I'll teach you more. The guy came back next day, and Hillel showed him the second letter of the alphabet, base, and told him, this is an Aleph. Aleph, the shape of an Aleph, and like showing a base, the second letter. And the guy, who was not a fool, he said, wait a second, yesterday you told me this is a Aleph. Now you're telling me this is a base. What's going on over here? Are you crazy? And so Hillel answered, oh, really? How did you know what I showed you yesterday was an Aleph? And how did you know that this that I'm showing you today is not an Aleph? Maybe this is an Aleph, and the other one was some other letter, or maybe an invention. How do you know that? Of course, the guy didn't have an answer, and the answer is oral Torah. That means the reading itself of what's written, you need an oral tradition to learn to read what's written. Otherwise, you don't know how to read it. So simple. Without oral tradition, there's nothing. You don't even understand the letters. Okay, so they go together hand by hand, but the Mishnah was the first book, written book, sounds of course paradoxical, written book of oral Torah. Because Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who was the author of the Mishnah, saw, there are different explanations, this is the simplest one, saw that the times were very difficult and the Jewish people were suffering a lot, the Romans and so on. Actually, Rabbi Yehuda lived in the times of the Second Temple, finishing in the times of the Second Temple, and then the temple was destroyed, and the Jewish people went to exile and so on. So we needed some physical support for our wisdom, our learning, our teaching, and so on. So he wrote the Mishnah. Okay. Then, years later, you can see over here how many years later, basically, nobody knows the exact years, but around those years, Rav Ashi and Ravina wrote the Gemara. The Gemara means the explanations for the Mishnah. The Mishnah is basically in Hebrew, the Gemara is in Aramaic. They wrote an explanation of the Mishnah and expounded many, many cases that were not brought down in the Mishnah, and they extracted the law of these new cases from the old cases and from the rules of the Mishnah, the rulings of the Mishnah, and so on. That's the Gemara. And it has a very, very particular order. It's not so easy to follow the order of the Gemara. Sometimes they start talking about one thing, then suddenly they jump and start talking about something else, then they go back, and it's not such an easy book to learn, so to speak. This is the Gemara. And the Gemara brings all kinds of things. You can see over here some of the ideas of the contents of the Gemara, discussions and interpretations and stories, and all kinds of very interesting ideas. From within those ideas, sometimes, and this is what we're going to learn, the Gemara brings a verse. To learn from that verse could be from the 5 books of Moses or from the later books, prophets and writings and so on, a verse to learn a specific law. Sometimes the law actually has relevance today. Sometimes it doesn't, but it doesn't really matter. They argue anyway, they bring the sources, and sometimes even really, really not relevant things, our sages, like even in modern times, they bring from those places that look irrelevant, and they learn laws that are relevant for us today. That's the job, so to speak, of great rabbis. Like they extract laws from all kinds of weird places. Okay, this is the Talmud, this is the Gemara, this is the main learning of the Jewish people throughout generations, from that year 450, 460, whatever, on. This is what we learn. You go to any yeshiva, any learning institute of Jewish rabbis and Jewish students and so on, what are they learning? Learning Gemara. That's what we learn. One time and a second time and a third time, and we never stop learning this. And the deepness that it has, it's amazing. Over here, I just put one page. I know you cannot read anything. I can't read anything anyway either. But the centerpiece is Mishnah, just a little bit over here. And the rest is Gemara. And over here we have Rashi, commentators. Rashi, Toises, commentators to commentators, Rabbi Gershom, all kinds of, you see, small things written all around the page. Those are comments and comments to the comments and comments to the comments, and no end. Literally no end. And books and books and books written about this. Okay, that's the Talmud. Oops, on the other way. Okay. Before learning what we're going to learn, let's see why are we actually spending a whole class on this subject. There was a guy, here's the name. I took this information from Wikipedia. I know Wikipedia is not a very, very good source, but on these things that are historical, like nobody can really argue this. This is known. This guy, Pranaitis, he was a priest, Lithuanian Catholic priest, and he wrote a book. The book was called the Talmud Unmasked. I don't know in which language he wrote, in Polish or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But whatever. You can look it up, and you can actually buy this book. It's available. It's easily available online, not even buying. It's free. Talmud Unmasked. And this book brought all the terrible things that the Jewish people say in the Talmud about the non-Jews. Again, even though it's really garbage, really, really garbage, but you could read it. And you will see, wow, I have a bunch of rabbis teaching me all kinds of things, but this is what the rabbis really think about me. So I'm not learning anything else from the rabbis. Forget it. Jews are crazy. They hate me. This is what the book talks about. All the places in the Talmud that the Jews talk about the non-Jews and talk terrible things about the non-Jews. They're animals. You can kill them. You can violate them. You can do whatever you want with them. All kinds of things. A whole book. Now, 1912, this guy Pranaitis, he was a witness. You can read over here. It's very interesting. It's just a little piece of something longer. But he was a witness on a blood label against this guy. He was a Jew, Menachem Mendel Beilis, in Russia. And he was brought as an expert in Talmud. He wrote a book about the Talmud. He's an expert in Talmud. So they asked him a few questions. The defense, I underline these parts. The defense demonstrated his ignorance in some very basic, simple Talmudic things. Like any Talmudic student, believe me, even kids, young boys, Girls, not so much, but young boys start learning Talmud around 10 years, when they're 10 years old, 11 years old, and start learning, of course, according to their level, whatever. These things, even the 10-year-old boys know that. What's chulin? Chulin means like not holy things. Eruvin means a process through which a person can carry things in Shabbos in certain places. Baba Basra is one of the most famous, believe me, tractates of the Talmud. Talks about laws, economic laws, what happens when a person builds something here and the other one builds something here, damages and so on, inheritances. Baba Basra, if you don't know what Baba Basra means, you have no idea what Talmud is. Forget it. You're out. It's like asking a doctor, what's a muscle? And the guy says, I have no idea, never heard that word. Really? You never heard what a muscle is? What kind of doctor are you? Even if his specialty is bones or whatever, he heard at least the word, You have to learn medicine. Okay. So this guy, Pranaitis, didn't know any of these terms. He didn't know what they're talking about. So how can you be a witness saying that you're an expert in Talmud and write a book about Talmud? You don't even know the most basic things that even children know. So with this, we can understand the authority, the real value of this book is garbage, complete garbage. But having said that, wait a second. It doesn't mean that there are no strange phrases in the Talmud regarding the non-Jews. There are. Even though he manipulated and he changed things, okay, the book is garbage. You can look it up and you'll see it's garbage. However, there are some weird things. Let's learn one of them. Talmud Yevamois 61a. You can look up the page. Actually, this over here, I took it out from Sepharia. The translation is from Sepharia. I, on purpose, left the Hebrew part and the English part. You can see like the underlined letters, words are the real words, and the rest is just the English additions in order to be able to understand what it's talking about. And down here, over here, I wrote the original version of the Talmud. I'll read it to you. I know it's not translated. Don't worry. I'm not expecting you to know Hebrew. English you should know. Probably better than me, but not Hebrew. Don't worry. And over here, I wrote some parts of the commentary of Rashi. Rashi is the main commentator of the Talmud and the Torah itself. He lived in France, year 1100 and 100. Okay, so let's go. Let's learn. Kivre goyim, over here it says goyim. Goy means a nation. That's the meaning of the word. Actually, the Jewish people is also called a goy in the Torah. Mi goy godel, who's a great nation and so on. God calls the Jewish people a goy also. It's true. It is used despectively towards non-Jews. That's true. But it's just a word. The word in itself doesn't have anything bad. Now, over here, even if you don't know Hebrew, don't worry. It says goyim over here. Look over here. This is the original Talmud, not the Sepharia version. It doesn't say goy. It says kivrei over here. Kivrei. But then over here it says goyim, and here it doesn't say goyim. Why? Because the original version says the graves of the idolaters, of the koichavim. That's what it says over here. Idolaters. They changed it over here in Sepharia to put it a little bit nicer, so to speak. But the truth, what is the Talmud talking about? It's talking about a grave of a regular, those days, idolater. Pagan, those guys that destroyed the temple and so on. Okay, the graves of the Gentiles do not render items impure through a tent. Stop. There are different types of impurity in Judaism. One of the types of impurity is impurity of a corpse. But even within the impurity of a corpse, there are different types of impurity of a corpse. You could touch it and you become impure. Or you could actually be in the same tent, in the same room with a corpse, and you also become impure. Okay. Or could be that the body is buried. In this case, it's a grave. It's buried. And you actually go on top of it. It doesn't mean that you touch it or you actually step on it. No, but you just go on top of it. You pass on top of it, you become impure. That's if a Jewish, if a Jew is buried over there. What about a Gentile? What about a non-Jew? In this case, again, I go back to the original text. There's an idolater over there, there's a pagan over there buried, full of graves all over the world. So can you pass through it? The answer is yes. Do you become impure or not? This is what the Talmud is arguing. Now, before going on, even though you can read it and it's fine, we're going to read it together. But before moving on, what implications does it bring for a person to be impure? Zero. Nothing. I'm impure, and I don't have any problem with that. My whole family is impure also. Everybody that I'm in touch with is impure also. Just because we live outside of Eretz Israel, we're already impure. And if you live in Eretz Israel and none of Israel, you're also impure. The only implication would be if you're a Kohen, a descendant of priests, then you cannot become impure. And if you become impure, no problem. We don't do anything about it. There's no problem. So we're not discussing something 100% practical for regular people. No, we're just discussing this. Why are we discussing this? Because you would not be able, being impure, to enter the temple or to eat part of a korban, of a sacrifice, which anyway today doesn't happen. We don't have a temple, we don't have sacrifices. So anyway, doesn't really apply. It's not something practical. But the Talmud is discussing it anyway. The graves of the Gentiles do not render people or things impure through a tent. That means by just being on top of it, even if you don't touch it. Why not? Because if you're actually on top of a grave of a Jew, you are impure. Why are you not impure if you're on top of the grave of a non-Jew? Because there's a verse. What does the verse say? The verse says, and you, my sheep, this is a verse in Ezekiel. You, my sheep, says God, the sheep of my pasture, says God, are men. You are Adam. Adam Atem. That's what the verse says. You are called Adam. What does it mean, word Adam? Let's look at Rashi. Regarding the corpse of impurity in a tent is written a man when he dies in a tent. Parshas Chukas, the parsha we learned last week, says Adam ki yamus be'ovel. When a person, a man, dies in a tent. Oh, so the whole kinds of laws about it. So we see that there's a certain type of impurity of a corpse regarding the word Adam, man, and tent, oil. Let's go back to Ezekiel. Ezekiel says, you, that means the Jewish people, my sheep, my pasture, are called Adam. You are called man. You are called Adam. Let's jump the non-underlined words. You, the Jewish people, are called men, Adam. But Gentiles are not called men, Adam. Stop. See that there's nothing else underlined. What does that mean? Let's go back. The Jewish people are called men. The non-Jews are not called men. Stop. That's what the Talmud says. This guy Pranaitis added, that means that non-Jews are called animals. You see? The Jewish people call the non-Jews animals. For them, for the Jews, the non-Jews are animals. Not even human beings. Forget it. Animals. They talk. Animals talking. They walk and it's just animals. Forget it. That's what he wanted to prove from this place in the Talmud. For those who know Hebrew, Atem kruim Adam, the Jewish people are called men. Veina goyim kruim Adam, but the non-Jews, goyim, look over here, ein hoivdei kechavim, the idolaters, the pagans, are not called Adam, are not called men. Stop. The Talmud doesn't finish over here. Really? Are not called men? I don't believe you. Let's move on. The Talmud says, wait a second, I have an objection to this. I can find places where the non-Jews are called Adam, men. Which places? So we see in the war of the Jewish people against Midian, the people of Midian, they brought back from the war all kinds of things, including people. And the Torah recounts how many people the Jewish people brought from that war. And it says, Nefesh Adam, the souls of human beings, we're talking about non-Jews, They were the people of Midian, not Jews. Shisha Asar Aleph, 16,000. So we do see that there's such a thing called Adam, referring non-Jews. So how do you tell me in the previous paragraph that the non-Jews are not called Adam? We do see non-Jews being called Adam. And the Gemara answers, the Talmud answers, nah, that's because we wanted to say, from one hand, we're talking about human beings, on the other hand, we're talking about animals. So if you're really talking about animals like dogs and cats, okay, wait a second, you cannot call a non-Jew a dog and a cat. No, it's not the same thing. Forget it. But are they called Adam, like human beings? No. Again, it's not that the Talmud is calling them animals, not at all. But if you're going to compare, yeah, okay, this is called Adam, man, and this is called animal. But if you don't need to compare, the non-Jews are not called Adam, not called man. Let's look at Rashi. This is written, all this verse, Nefesh, Adam, etc. This is written regarding the men of Midian. And the Gemara answers, the fact that are called men, Adam, is in comparison to animals, but just Adam, like the word man, does it apply to non-Jews? The answer is no. They're not called Adam. This is one place where we find non-Jews being called Adam. And the Gemara answers is just comparing through human beings to animals. Okay, let's move on. This is the last piece of Talmud we're going to learn. All right, let's look at another story. There's another story in Jonah, I think it's called in English, whatever. Jonah is a very interesting book, very short, very interesting book, where Jonah is a prophet and he's sent to Nineveh, a city full of non-Jews. There was not even one Jew, and he has to prophesy for them that God is angry and is going to destroy everything and so on. And he ends up not destroying because they did tshuva, they repented. Okay. The verse over there in Jonah, it says, Asher yesh ba'harbe mishteyim seriboy Adam. There's more, says the Torah, I mean the book of Jonah, there's more than 1,200,000 men. Adam. Asher lo yada ben yamin l'smoile, that they don't know from between right and left. That means they don't know they're going to be destroyed. They were never taught to behave properly, not to steal and not to kill and so on. But they're still called men. Why are you going to destroy it? That's basically what the book talks about. I'm not going to explain the story of Jonah right now. That's not the point. But the point over here is we do find a verse that calls a non-Jews Adam. And the Gemara answers exactly the same thing. Now, you see here, there too, the Gentiles are given the title due to the need to distinguish them from animals. Okay, they're not animals, you're right. But if you ask, that's why in this verse they're called Adam, men. But that doesn't really mean that they're really called Adam by themselves. And Rashi makes a very interesting point. The people of Nineveh were idolaters. Don't think that they were so religious and so, monotheism and so on. No. And they're still called Adam. They're idolaters, pagans and so on. But they're still called Adam, men. So again, the Gemara says, when compared to animals, they're called men. So they're not really animals. But are they called men by themselves when not comparing to animals? The answer is no. So I'm going back on purpose. Just a second. Let's go back. Since Jews, atem krim adam, since Jews are called men just by itself, and non-Jews are not called men just by itself, not when compared to animals, that brings out the law that since the word men, Adam, is used when talking about the impurity of a corpse in a tent, and non-Jews are not called men by themselves, that means that non-Jews do not impurify a Jew when it's, for instance, buried, and the Jew is going through, not touching, but going through this grave. Point. That's the law. Now, is the Torah in this place, the Talmud, really talking about the qualities of non-Jews, how they behave, how they look? No. No, the Talmud doesn't really care about that issue in this place. No, we're just talking about the laws of purity and impurity. when a Jew gets impurified, so to speak, or not. That's the only thing we're talking about. And what about the graves of the non-Jews? They do not impurify. Why? Okay, because they're not called Adam by themselves. All right. So the Talmud basically finished. Now we're going to a commentary. Toises. Toises is a commentary built upon years and years of commentaries. Most of the rabbis commentating in Toises are grandsons or somehow relatives of Rashi, years after Rashi. And over here we're going to learn about one of them, Rabbi Tam. He was called Yaakov Tam. He was a grandson of Rashi. Rashi didn't have boys, didn't have children, boys. He only had girls, and he taught them Talmud to these girls, and they were very, very special girls, 3 if I'm not mistaken. And one of these girls had a son who was Yaakov Tam, Rabbi Tam. He was a headache, terrible person, boy, like making all kinds of noise and problems and so on. He became one of the greatest of the whole story of the Jewish people. One of the greatest, Rabbi Tam. Okay, so Toises has a very simple question on all the things that we learn, all the pieces of Gemara where we learn. And let's learn this inside. The Talmud, says, the Gentiles are not called men. Toises asks, this is astonishing. What do you mean? Not called men? You're nuts. Of course they're men. In one place in the Talmud, and in a second place in the Talmud, we expound that a Gentile, a non-Jew, who engages in Torah, of course, in his allowed part of Torah and so on, is like a Kohen Gadol, is like a high priest. Wait a second, you're calling the non-Jews not men, they're like a high priest. Because why? The verse says, you shall therefore keep my statutes and my ordinance, which if a man does, whatever, I don't know how to read it, and shall live by them. Asher ya'aseh isam ha'adam v'chai bohem, says the verse in Vayikra, at the end of Vayikra, in Parshas Acharei Mois. Okay, so the Parsha says basically that when a person actually, man, says the Torah, does the mitzvahs, he lives by the mitzvahs, and the Talmud says, it is not stated priests, Levites, Israelites, that they do the mitzvahs. No. It says man. So we see the non-Jews are called men. So how can the Talmud says over here in Yevamois that non-Jews are not called men? We do find a place where the Talmud itself calls the non-Jews men, using a verse from the Torah. So it's a contradiction. How do you solve this contradiction? Rabbi Tam has a very interesting idea. And later we're going to learn another idea, nothing related to Rabbi Tam. Very interesting idea. Rabbi Tam explains the following idea. Man in Hebrew is called Adam. It's written Adam. And the man, Ha-Adam, the man are two different things. Don't confuse. Gentiles are included in the idea of Ha-Adam, the man. Look over here. The verse says over here, you shall therefore keep my statutes and my ordinances, which if a man, English says a man, but the verse says Ha-Adam, shall live by them. Okay, very nice. People have to live by the ordinances and so on from God, statutes from God. But the verse talks about Ha-Adam, with a hey, the men. That includes non-Jews, clearly, because we have two places, Avodah Zarah and Sanhedrin in the Talmud, that clearly says that Ha-Adam, the man, includes non-Jews, even calls them like a Kohen Gadol, like a high priest. But when the Torah says Adam, just like that, without the hey, Ha-Adam, no. Adam, that only talks about Jews. It's two different expressions. Let's learn the Toises from inside. But surely it says, it does not say priests, Levites, and Israelites. That's what the Talmud says in Avodah Zarah and Sanhedrin, calling the non-Jews high priests when they engage in the Torah learning, whatever they have to learn and so on. If the word man excludes Gentiles, it should have said it does not say man. No, ha-adam. Adam. This means, I'll explain in a second in different words. This means that if it does not say man, which would connote priests, Levites, and Israelites, I'll explain in a second, rather the man. Support for that is that in all the verses we ask from, it says men. We do not ask from verses that say the men. Stop. What is Rabbeinu Tam saying over here? Rabbeinu Tam is posing a very simple difference between two expressions in the Torah. Expression number one, Adam, men. Expression number two, Ha-Adam, the men. Two different words. Just one letter difference. When the Torah says just the word Adam, that refers only to Jews. When the Torah says Ha-Adam, that includes also non-Jews. This is what Rabbeinu Tam is saying. So let's go back a little bit. If my computer wants, let's go back a little bit. Look at the verse in Ezekiel. The verse says, Adam, you see, just 3 letters. Even if you don't know the letters, doesn't matter. 3 letters, Adam. That means men. Adam Atem. You, the Jews, are called Adam. And non-Jews are not called Adam. That doesn't mean that they're animals, like Pranaitis wanted to say. No, you got it wrong. The Torah is talking specifically about one characteristic of a human being, calling him, her, whatever, Adam. That means he's a Jew, and that means it renders whatever it's on top of it impure, if it's dead, whatever. A Jew buried, somebody's on top of that grave, it's impure. And if we have a non-Jew buried, and there's a Jew on top of this grave, it's not impure. Why? Because over here we're talking about Adam. Now, look at the verses, the 2 verses from where the Gemara asks. It says the word Adam. It doesn't say Ha-Adam. There are thousands, I don't know, it says thousands. Of course, tens and tens of verses that talk about human beings in Tehillim, in Psalms, in the Torah itself, and calls them human beings. Of course, they're human beings. Here, we're not arguing whether a non-Jew is a human being or not. Of course, they're a fool. You see, 2 eyes, 2 nose, and so on. It's a human being. We're talking about the laws of impurity. Regarding those laws, does the non-Jew impurify somebody or not? The answer is no. In this particular way of impurity of a tent. In other times of impurity, the non-Jew also impurifies. That's why the Gemara only asked from 2 verses, even though we have many verses that talk about non-Jews and calls them Ha-Adam, the man. Yeah, but we only found 2 that calls them Adam. You see? The Gemara asks just from 2 places we find the same words, because those are the only 2 places where non-Jews are called Adam. In the rest of the places, they're called Ha-Adam, the man. That's what Rabbeinu Tam wants to say. What's the conclusion of this? Don't come and use this particular idea of the Talmud to say that the Jews call the non-Jews animals. No. That's not what we're talking about. Not at all. Not at all. Okay, having said all of this is the answer of Rabbeinu Tam. This is what the commentary of Tosfos, which is in the page of the Talmud itself, wants to bring out. But let's learn something more. The truth is, it's a huge, really long writing, commentary. I just brought down a few ideas out of this commentary. But before that, I forgot about this. This is very interesting, very interesting. Before that, one place where you can see the difference between Adam and Ha-Adam. From the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe is the founder of Chabad movement. He wrote the Tanya. Tanya is a very interesting book of Hasidus, of Hasidic thought. There's one chapter, even though he repeats the idea in other places, but one chapter specifically talking about humility. You should be humble. And there's a teaching in Pirkei Avos, in the Ethics of Our Fathers, And the teaching says, Rabbi Meir says, whatever, he says something else, and then he says, be humble in front all of men. Be in front of all men. And Rabbi Meir says, Adam. What would that mean? Let's use Rabbeinu Tam's teaching. When we say Adam, it means Jews. When we say Ha-Adam, it means non-Jews. Okay, wait a second. Rabbi Meir is saying you should be humble in front of Jews. One Jew has to be humble in front of another Jew. Do you have to be humble in front of a non-Jew? No. Rabbi Meir doesn't say that. It says Adam. Okay, let's look at the Alter Rebbe now. Chapter 30. The Alter Rebbe is talking about humility. It says, moreover, this you could put to your heart to fulfill the saying of our sages. He's quoting Rabbi Meir, but he changes one letter. He says, be humble before all men. The Alter Rebbe says, Ha-Adam. Look over here. Bifnei kol Ha-Adam. You see the hey? It's 4 letters. It's not 3. It's 4. The Alter Rebbe adds 1 letter. What does that mean? Okay, Rabbi Meir says a Jew should be humble in front of another Jew. That's regular, common teaching. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, you want to go beyond the letter of the law? Hasidus, that's what Hasidus means. Beyond the letter of the law. If you really want to be humble, you should be humble in front of Jews and also in front of non-Jews. And how does it say this? Just by adding 1 letter. Ha-Adam. You see that he's quoting the same thing? Hevei shfal ruach b'fnei kol ha-Adam. And tell you more. When the Alter Rebbe brings his version of Pirkei Avos, of the ethics of our fathers, in his Siddur, in his prayer book, because we do say it in Shabbos, in summer, whatever, and that the explanation doesn't matter right now. When he brings this version of the Mishnah, what does the Alter Rebbe say in the Siddur, in the prayer book for Jews? Just Adam. That's the regular version. That's what you should have in your mind. But when the Alter Rebbe is teaching you Hasidus, a deeper level of understanding God, the Alter Rebbe says, Ha-Adam. He adds 1 letter. Why? Because he is thinking about what Rabbeinu Tam said. Rabbeinu Tam said, Ha-Adam includes non-Jews also. You should be really humble. Doesn't really matter if the person in front of you is a Jew or non-Jew. You should be humble anyway. That's what the Alter Rebbe brings. Okay, after having said all of this, let's move on to basically the end. There's a lot to say about this, and believe me, it's a really long and complex text. Why is it complex? Because of the author, which is a very complex book to read and to learn, but he is a genius. He was a genius, real genius. We're talking about the Malbim. Malbim, this is his name, Meir Leibush ben Yechiel Michal Weiser, I don't know. He lived in Poland. These are the years. And he wrote a commentary on almost all the Tanakh, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, whatever. He wrote a commentary, complex commentary. He was an expert in Hebrew, like real expert. And throughout his commentaries, and also mainly his commentary to Nach, to prophets and to writings. He didn't finish the whole commentary of writings and so on. But whatever, when you read his commentary, he looks at nuances so deep, very words that look the same. He says, no, don't get confused. This means a feeling in the heart. This means a feeling in the brain, whatever. He brings very deep ideas, very interesting and difficult to learn. And he wrote a commentary on within all his commentary, on 1 verse in the Torah. All of this is taken out of 1 commentary that he did on Va'ikra. Va'ikra, in the beginning of the 3rd book of the Torah says that we have to bring offerings. And the Torah says, Adam ki yakriv mikem korban lashem. When a person of you makes a korban, an offering to God and so on, what are the laws of offerings? You can look at the 3rd book of the Torah and so on. Very good. But the Torah starts saying Adam, man. When a man brings a korban and so on, an offering. So it has a long explanation of what the word man means. What does it mean? And he brings our Gemara. He brings our piece of the Talmud. And he says something very strong. But it is interesting. Okay, first of all, he brings a difference between the word ish in Hebrew and the word Adam. Ish usually is used for saying man. If you go to Israel and say Ish Echad, there's one man. That's really what it means. But he says if you really want to go deep and understand Hebrew, the true Hebrew and so on, it's not the same. Ish represents an individual, but it could be anything, even an object. And he brings verses and so on. Why? Because the word ish, I wrote it in Hebrew on purpose, is related to the word yesh. Yesh, you see, it's written basically the same, means existence. There's an existence, the yesh, yeshus, something that exists, an object. So a man could be called an object, and a cup could be also called an object. So we use throughout the whole Torah the word ish, referring to all kinds of things, to plants, to animals, to stones, to men. Doesn't make a difference. That's ish. But the word Adam, and this is the very interesting part of what the Malbim says, the word Adam only refers to human beings. Only. There's no place in the Torah. He brings even one exception. I don't remember exactly now what the exception was, and he explains it, but whatever. There's no place in the Torah that the word Adam is used if not referring to a human being. Stop. With this idea, we could already finish. Why? Because clearly, when you call the non-Jews Ha-Adam, or whatever way you want to call them, it means a human being. You could argue what type of human being, a good guy, a bad guy, that's another story. However, definitely, it's talking about a human being. So let's not call the non-Jews animals. Erase that, delete that idea from your mind. Judaism doesn't call non-Jews animals. Forget it. They're human beings. Again, maybe they're bad guys, evil guys. Okay, there are Jews that are also bad guys. What can I say? But we're not talking about how he behaves, she behaves. We're talking about what's this thing in front of you? It's a human being. Or it's a dog, it's a cat, whatever. This is a human being. Is it a Jew? No, but it's a human being. Okay. So that's what the word Adam means. Why? Why the word Adam? Because it comes from the word Adama. Adama means dust, earth. Man, if you look at the beginning of the Torah, was created from the earth, the body and so on. And clearly the body of a human being is different than the body of an animal, clearly. So when talking about the word Adam, you're referring to a specific shape and characteristics of a body, bodily things. The guy has two eyes, and over here, and a nose, and the ears, and so on. Yeah, I know, dogs also have eyes and nose. Yeah, but they're not like ours. They're different, whatever. It's a dog, it's a cat, it's a blah, blah, blah. But when you're talking about the word Adam, in any context you want to put it, it's talking about what we know in the world as a human being. We're not talking about behaviors. We're just talking about the body of this person is a human being. That's it. Point. And then he brings another idea, very interesting, to move on with this idea that we're learning. Adam is an essential name. What does that mean? Adam usually refers to a human being because it has a thinking soul, has a shape of God inside of it, Tselem Elokim, the image of God, whatever that means, free will, and so on. Usually, when using the word Adam in the Torah, it refers to somebody that is worried about what God really wants from him, her, whatever. That's usually what the word Adam means. But again, Adam, it's a bodily thing. It's a bodily thing. You cannot confuse it with an animal. However, there are some men that don't behave like men, behave like animals. And that's how the Malbim explains this piece of a Talmud that we were learning. A person, a human being, that has no godly religion, these are the words that he says, and is abominable to serve idols, is like an animal with the form of man. So with this idea, which is basically the end of what I wanted to teach, let's go back to the Talmud. When the Talmud calls the Jews Adam, is referring specifically to Jews that behave like God wants. And when he calls the non-Jews, you don't call it Adam. Don't get mixed with Rabbeinu Tam. This is a different answer. When you call the non-Jews, not when you don't call them Adam, why? Are there animals? No, are you a fool? You see, the guy looks like a human being. He's not an animal, but he behaves like an animal. Why? Does he steal? No. He doesn't have any connection to God. That's it. If you don't have a connection to God, you're out. That doesn't mean, don't make a mistake. Don't misunderstand me. That doesn't mean that a person that commits idolatry suddenly becomes like a dog and a cat. No. But he's behaving differently than what God expects from a human being. If you can think, you can discover me, would say God, so to speak. If you can think, if you have free will that I gave you, you can find me. And if you're not looking for me, why are you better than a dog and a cat? The dog and a cat is also not looking for me. It's just a dog and a cat. Okay, so you live just like a dog and a cat. But that doesn't mean that you're an animal. No, you're a human being, of course. And you could change your ways and behave and develop yourself and improve yourself. Yeah, very nice. But in the meantime, I'm sorry, you're behaving like an animal. And the point, and somebody actually commented this in the chat, and the point is, if you're serving idols, idolatry, forget it. You're like an animal. But again, not a real, true, whatever, dog and cat. No, human being behaving like an animal. So, in summary, let's go back. We found a place in the Talmud that says that Jews are called Adam, non-Jews are not called Adam. Idolaters, the true version of the Talmud, are not called Adam, which is weird. We brought two questions from two places in the Torah that it says Adam referring to non-Jews, and we said, when you actually put them in front of an animal, you're right, it's human beings. But otherwise, no, they're not called Adam. And then we brought an explanation from Rabbeinu Tam, making a difference between Adam and Ha-Adam, two expressions in the Torah. Adam refers to Jews. Ha-Adam refers also to non-Jews. And we brought a teaching from the Alter Rebbe, showing how a person should be humble. Even a Jew is talking to a Jew, because the Tanya was written for the Jews. Then you can actually interpret it and take lessons for non-Jews. It's very nice, but it's written for Jews. And a Jew should be humble even in front of a non-Jew, Ha-Adam. And then we brought another completely different answer. What's the completely different answer? A human being should search for God. Should search for something beyond himself, herself, and so on. That's what God is expecting of the human being. And if you don't do it, you're like an animal. Why are you better than an animal? What's better in you than an animal? Just behave like an animal. And he explained the difference between Ish, Adam, and so on. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. But basically, just like this phrase in the Talmud has an explanation, deeper or not so deep, whatever, each single quote-unquote weird phrase in the Talmud also has an explanation. The sages of the Jewish sages of the Talmud and before and after the Talmud and so on were not so worried about the non-Jews, like writing about them and talking about them. Who cares? It's painful to say this, but I don't know. We have so many problems inside of us and so many challenges and so on. You still have time to write about what the non-Jews do. Whatever, let them do whatever they want to do. That's the way of thinking, frame of mind of the teachings of the Talmud. You're going to find the Talmud Unmasked, and it says terrible things. Yeah, most of them are false. Most of them are false. And even those that are not so false, they do have an explanation. You have to sit down, learn inside, and you will find the explanation, definitely.